I didn't tell them anything that wasn't true. May we approach the bench a moment, Your Honor? While you were at the hospital, isn't it true that you consistently broke a great many of the rules there? The only rule that I know of that I broke was going off the grounds. Did they give you any medication other than aspirin while you were there, Miss Tracy? Not that I can recall. And you testified on direct that you were discharged as non-psychotic. I believe you put it? Yes, that is, Your Honor, again, I will object to that as calling for a conclusion of this witness as to whether she was non-psychotic. Well, it's been asked and answered, I think, anyway. She testified to that. I will sustain the objection. Let's talk about these naked pictures of you. How many were there? 3. Where did you say you got these pictures after you killed Amos? I finally found them in the cabinet on the right-hand side of the desk. All right, let's stop there. Defense Attorney, Mr. Turner, T-U-R-N-E-R. Mr. Stricker, S-T-R-I-C-K-E-R. Frank, F-R-A-N-K. Frank Dye, D-Y-E. Okay, 180 for voice for 5 minutes. Question by plaintiff's attorney. Ready? About half the size of the jury box. And so it is a relatively small cellar, yes. And then from the cellar, how do you get outside? You go through the room where the pump is, and then there is a square opening leading to the outside. And this is large enough for a person to get through? Yes. Are there stairs that go up to it? No. How do you get through it? Is it a floor level? No. It is not at floor level. It is about 2 or 3 feet above floor level. Is there any way to look or lock the trap door from the inside of the house? Yes. There was a lock on the trap door. What type of lock is it? A bolt or something like that, or a hook? No, you use a key on it, a regular key. It locks with a key? Yes, I believe it was broken. Mr. Stricker locked himself out of the house one night and went in through the back entrance and broke into the wine cellar and went up and broke the lock on the trap door to get back in the house. He had left his keys. Speaking of locks, isn't it true that Mr. Stricker had the locks changed on his house because you were constantly coming in there and drinking his liquor? I have no idea. Isn't it true that on one occasion he came in and found you passed out drunk on the floor, and that immediately after that he had all the locks changed? I don't know anything about Mr. Stricker having the locks changed. Do you recall him coming in there and you were there passed out drunk by the bar or in his house somewhere? I don't recall. Did he ever tell you that you had a drinking problem and not to come in and be drinking his liquor? Yes, he did. And didn't he say this was for your own good and you are going to have to control this problem that you have, and that he felt it was bad for you to have access to his liquor? No, he didn't say that. Well, in other words, was he telling you, if he made any statements, tell us what they were with regard to whether he was interested in preserving his liquor or whether he was interested in you not drinking as much as you did? He said he thought I was drinking too much. That was the reason that he said. Now, the night that you shot Mr. Stricker, or the night before, you were up at the Ross's house and Amos came up there to get Frank. Isn't that right? Yes. And didn't he at that time tell you that he would call you and that he was going to get rid of the people that were at his house? He would call you and you could come over later? No. At that time, he said nothing to me. When did he tell you that? When did he tell you when I was at his house? Oh, He said he would call you later after the people left, he told. This was before they returned from Knott's Berry Farm. He took me in the bathroom and told me that they were going to stay over for dinner and leave immediately afterwards. He told you this before it started to rain that day, didn't he? Yes, and then it started. Then it rained that day, did it not? Yes, it did. And then that night, he did actually have the courtesy to call you and tell you that these people wouldn't be going home until the next morning and for you not to come up. Isn't that true? If you could call it courtesy, I guess he did. But he called you anyway and told you that they were still there. He called and said that they decided to stay over earlier in the day. He said he was going to call you, didn't he? Yes. And he did call you, didn't he? Yes, but he also said that I was invited to come up there right after they finished dinner. This was early in the day, wasn't it? Yes. And as you testified, you were upset, you were mad, and you even recall you just hung up the phone. I wasn't particularly mad. I was upset and hurt, I suppose. But you hung up the phone, didn't you? I didn't know what else to say. There wasn't anything else for me to say. You were mad and jealous, were you not? I was jealous and hurt. I wouldn't say I was mad. Jealous and hurt. And the next day, Sunday, you were still jealous and hurt, were you not? I suppose so. Well, you were jealous and hurt. You didn't want to go up and see him again until Frank Dye talked to you. Isn't that true? Just a minute. I am going to object to the way that question was phrased as argumentative as to the first part. Read it back, please. I suppose as it is phrased, it might be considered argumentative. Strike the first part of the question. All right. 164 voice question by plaintiff's attorney. And how did you get down to the liquor store? I drove Amos's car because it was parked in front of mine. And did you eventually, before the next day when the police arrived, move your car so it wouldn't be seen in Amos's driveway? That wasn't the purpose that I moved it. I called my mother and she came over. But the car was moved, was it not? I drove both of us back over to her house. Did you or did your mother drive your car away from that location? I drove it. What did you do with his robe, with the bloody robe? As nearly as I can recall, I hung it up in the closet. The closet in Amos's bedroom? Yes. Is that the same bedroom that you have said that sometime before you had heard Lee talking to Amos and Lee had mentioned something about you and yes, that is the same bedroom. And was this in the daytime or the nighttime that you heard this? It was in the afternoon. When was it approximately? What month? I don't recall what month it was. What season of the year was it? It was in the summer. The windows were open. And how did you happen to go around back there to listen to any conversation? I don't know. What was your reason for doing that? Jealousy, I imagine. Could you hear what was said, everything that was said clearly? Yes. When I heard that, I left. When you came back from the Reef Liquor Store, you had a fifth of champagne. Is that correct? Yes. And you drank that night? I didn't drink it. Oh, you didn't drink it? No, I poured a glass of it and it made me sick. What was done with the rest of the champagne bottle? I poured it down the drain. Poured the entire fifth except for one glass down the drain? Yes. And then the bottle was empty then, was it not? I assume so. And so this accounts for the empty bottle of champagne that was in the kitchen. Is that true? There should have been two of them there. The one that you had drank with dinner also? Yes. Isn't it a fact that you drank that bottle of champagne before you killed Amos? Now that question is ambiguous. Which bottle is he talking about? I'm sorry, the bottle of champagne that you got from the Reef Liquor Store. Didn't you drink that, I suggest, before you killed Amos? No, I didn't get it before this happened. Was it daylight or dark when you went down to the Reef liquor store? It was dark. Are you sure it wasn't daylight? No. I wonder if at this point the court would be willing to take judicial cognizance, or perhaps Mr. Turner will stipulate that in the month of November, we can give it as much leeway as possible. In the month of November, it was dark by, pick an hour, 6:30, Your Honor. I will say it is dark by 5 o'clock anyway, Your Honor. Well, let's say it is dark by 6 o'clock. All right, the court will take notice of that fact. Your Honor, if the court please, let us have a witness. Let us get an almanac. Now, the court can take judicial notice, but I don't recall when the sun sets in any particular day in November. How were you dressed when you went down to the Reef liquor store? I was dressed in the same clothes I gave to you. To Mr. Cadman of the crime laboratory? Yes. And whoever? To the police. This was the blouse, was it? Yes. A yellow mandarin coat and a pair of Levi's. And when did you change from the bathrobe and the panties and put on this mandarin coat, or I will call it a blouse, and the Levi's? Just before I went down the hill. And that is when you hung the bathrobe in the closet? Yes. And that is how you were dressed when you bought the champagne? Yes. And when you came back into Amos's house, did you take off the Levi's and the mandarin jacket? I don't remember. Well, how were you stayed there all night. How were you dressed the rest of the night? I don't remember. The next morning, did you have to dress and put the Levi's back on, or were they already on? I think I stayed dressed the rest of the night. And when you got back at Amos's place, you sat down in the red chair at some time. When did you sit down in the red chair after you got back to Amos's place? I went into the bedroom and I took my clothes off. I wasn't dressed all evening. I think when my mother came over there, I still had the robe on. What you are doing now is, no, I told you in the first place that I didn't remember. Oh, I see. And I said that I thought I had remained dressed. Okay, let's stop there.
That didn't sound right.
Members of the jury, you have the right to weigh and examine all the evidence closely and carefully in the light of the common knowledge and experience of mankind in determining whether any evidence is reasonable or unreasonable or probable or improbable, and in determining what weight it is entitled to receive. I want to stress that the guilt of the defendant is not to be inferred because of facts proven which are inconsistent with his guilt, but on the contrary, before we can be a verdict of guilty, you must believe from all the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the facts proven are inconsistent with his innocence. If two conclusions can reasonably be drawn from the evidence, one of innocence and one of guilt, you should adopt the former. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the punishment provided by law for the offense charged in the indictment is a matter exclusively within the province of the court. It is my obligation, therefore, to direct you not to consider the matter of punishment in arriving at an impartial verdict as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant. Your responsibility is solely to determine the guilt or innocence of the accused on the evidence before you and in accordance with the law as given to you in these instructions. I repeat that the matter of punishment is one committed under the law to the attention of the court alone. I would ask you and direct you to consider each of the statements which I have made in this charge not merely in itself, but as related to all other points covered by the charge. In other words, consider my charge as a whole. I suggest that your first order of business when you come together in the jury room is to elect or select from your membership a foreman or forewoman to preside over your deliberations. Let's try that one again. Members of the jury, you have the right to weigh and examine all of the evidence closely and carefully in the light of the common knowledge and experience of mankind in determining whether any evidence is reasonable or unreasonable or probable or improbable, and in determining what weight it is entitled to receive. I want to stress that the guilt of the defendant is not to be inferred because of facts proven which are inconsistent with his guilt. But on the contrary, before there can be a verdict of guilty, you must believe from all the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the facts proven are inconsistent with his innocence. If two conclusions can reasonably be drawn from the evidence, one of innocence and the one of guilt, you should adopt the former. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the punishment provided by law for the offense charged in the indictment is a matter exclusively within the province of the court. It is my obligation, therefore, to direct you not to consider the matter of punishment in arriving at an impartial verdict as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant. Your responsibility is solely to determine the guilt or innocence of the accused on the evidence before you and in accordance with the law as given to you in these instructions. I repeat that the matter of punishment is one committed under the law to the attention of the court alone. I would ask you and direct you to consider each of the statements which I have made in this charge, not merely in itself, but as related to all other points covered by the charge. In other words, consider my charge as a whole. I suggest that your first order of business when you come together in the jury room is to elect or select from your membership a foreman or forewoman to preside over your deliberations. Okay. Okay, this one's for readback. Members of the jury, you have the right to weigh and examine all of the evidence closely and carefully in the light of the common knowledge and experience of mankind in determining whether any evidence is reasonable or unreasonable or probable or improbable, and in determining what weight it is entitled to receive. I want to stress that the guilt of the defendant is not to be inferred because of facts proven which are inconsistent with his guilt, but on the contrary, before there can be a verdict of guilty, you must believe from all the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the facts proven are inconsistent with his innocence. If two conclusions can reasonably be drawn from the evidence, one of innocence and one of guilt, you should adopt the former. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the punishment provided by law for the offense charged in the indictment is a matter exclusively within the province of the court. It is my obligation, therefore, to direct you not to consider the matter of punishment in arriving at an impartial verdict as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant. Your responsibility is solely to determine the guilt or innocence of the accused on the evidence before you and in accordance with the law as given to you in these instructions. I repeat that the matter of punishment is one committed under the law to the attention of the court alone. I would ask you and direct you to consider each of the statements which I have made in this charge, not merely in itself, but as related to all other points covered by the charge. In other words, consider my charge as a whole. I suggest that your first order of business when you come together in the jury room is to elect or select from your membership a foreman or forewoman to preside over your deliberations. Recommendations to the committee that did the interview as to who would be hired? No, sir. Did you sit in on this committee? Yes, there were 2 committees. Could you explain that? Yes, sir. When the advisory council met during the latter part of the year, or the first summer, we had gone into Title I very hurriedly. We were the last school at that time chosen to participate in this program. We were not admitted to the program until almost June. We had that time to get our budget and so forth and hire the aides. We had met, decided on the number of aides we would need in order to give each teacher in the school an aide to cut down the teacher-pupil ratio. One of the criteria of selecting an aide is that it must be done with the representation from the community of a parent and 1 administrator.